Quando a gente começar a apresentação, então, acho que eu apago um pouquinho essa luz da frente, tá bem? Good morning. Okay. Welcome for our second day of the workshop. We will have a very interesting day of presentation and discussion. Actually, there is some small changes in the program due to the speakers, so we are adjusted a little bit. Actually, the topic of water technology that were supposed to be all the presentation in one session. Due to the availability of one of our colleagues that we really wanted also to be here and join the others, so we made this adjustment. So when you look to the program, we will make the following change. We will have our first presentation with the natural-based solutions for water and green infrastructure in cities. After that, we'll have the second one with water reuse and membrane technology. I don't have exactly the title here, but that's the topic. And the third one, we have the water governance and social participation with the experience of the Cape Town, South Africa. So the one that was as a second, that is ecotechnology for urban areas of Professor Daniel Piccilli, go to the afternoon. We will join the others with the microplastic and pollution in aquatic system, potable and non-potable water reuse. So we have to make that adjustment. Well, I would like that now to present the speakers and the moderator, and we will start. The presentation of each speaker will be done by the moderator. But first of all, I would like to welcome Professor Norbert Dichtel from the Technische University of Braunschweig. He's the coordinator of the Exceed Swindon, the project. He is the person that made this workshop and the full support and the program happens. So that's the guy that makes things happen here. Okay. Our thank you very much for all the effort. I don't know if you have any words that you'd like to okay, later. All right. So with this, I would like to say that to introduce my colleague. His name is Paulo Sinisgali. We work together at the same institute, the School of Arts, Science and Humanities. Professor Paulo Sinisgali is a sanitary and environmental engineer as bachelor. He got his PhD in environmental economics from University of Campinas, and we have been working closer for a while. His expertise is also in water management, ecological economics, so he will take care of the works in this morning, in introducing the speakers and work as the moderator. So thank you very much for accepting. And we have here also Professor Paulo Pellegrino, that he also is very welcome here for our workshop. Professor José Carlos Miersva from School of Engineering. So I will let my colleague to introduce you, just announce the names. And thank you very much for letting us have you here this morning. Thank you.
Thank you very much for inviting me to come. It's a very good opportunity to receive some very good information about the water management and this link it with sustainable goals. And I would like to invite Paulo Pellegrino to come to have a floor to speak about our water governance, resilient cities and climate change, natural-based solution for water and green infrastructure cities. As Marcelo mentioned, Paulo Pellegrino has PhD in architecture at the University of São Paulo. His research is associated with landscape architecture. He's coordinator of Lab Verde that link structural functions and landscape as green infrastructure, landscape ecology, and resilience. Please, Paulo Pellegrino, you have half an hour to speak. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Paulo Sinisgali. Thank you, Marcelo, everyone. Good morning to everyone. I'm, as Paulo has said, I'm an architect, but I'm being specializing in landscape architecture, in how to design and how to develop landscapes that could perform several functions for our cities and regions. And we are dealing in our laboratory at the School of Landscape, our School of Architecture and Urban Planning here at the university. We are dealing in our laboratory, the Lab Verde, Green Lab in English, but the name is Lab Verde in Portuguese. It's a laboratory where we are dealing with some research. And one of the last researches I'm going to show you now, today, some of the results that have been dealing with this research, that's dealing mostly with how we can recover the waters of the cities like São Paulo. We're dealing with some urban watershed plan, where we are dealing with how we can work, how we can start to mitigate the impact of the city, of the urban impact of the urban fabric and the urban uses in the quality of the urban waters. I should start here. I think how you can put the presentation on. I think I can use myself here, Dave. Okay. It's self-service here.
I can help you.
No, I can do that. I use mine here. No problem. I put here, it's the... Oh, well, I can sit here, okay. This presentation is called exactly what Marcelo has told. It's called Restoring Streams in Cities. The NBS is for nature-based solution. I think you have heard about this. I don't know about this concept. It's been using how we can use this, the technologies that nature has been providing for us for centuries, perhaps millennia or even million years. They have been developing in this planet the natural process that had been helping us and life being developing this planet for several eras in this planet, and how we can regain again these ancient technologies and several problems that have been already solved in this planet, how can regain again the possibility to work in our favor. How you can go further here? How we start this? This is an image of the basin where the city, São Paulo city, was located. If you see, this is a very, very well-drained area. If you see this São Paulo, as you can see, was built over a very water drenched area. No, this is a sedimentary basin in the upper plateau above the Sierra do Mar. The Serra do Mar was this area. You see in the São Paulo has a strange, different area because you are in a very high plateau area above the sea level, and all the waters flows in direction of the inlands. And all these main rivers starts above the sea area and goes down all the way, following in a kind of, how do you call this form? Like, how to say lake in English? How to say this form of something that goes in this? Funnel. A funnel. Yeah, it's like a funnel. They go, all the waters starts to reunite, to go in this same point that you see, that's all is cut together in the same area that you got see in the upper left corner. So it's very interesting to see how all this same amount of lot of creeks and main rivers, all in these huge floodplains that used to be the parts where the city was built above, no? But how do you try to make about this area? Excuse me. You make this above this area. You put all this in a very most simple design. You remember, no, it's a very complex, of course, but what I'm saying that all that intricacies, all that very subtle way of the water and landscape to work with, you reduced in the way of these very straight lines of the avenues. If you see the main avenues of the city, you can see in this nightlife, the straight avenues in the night of the street lamps. You see all the main avenues of the rivers were reduced in these avenues, the main avenues of the city. So all the waters now were channelized by the main avenues. And all these signifies what? Signifies that all the speed of the water, all the quality of the water were compromised, because you now makes all these a very, very kind of conveyance of all this water in a very fast way, carrying all the dirt, all this diffuse pollution, all this all that sediments, all that happens in these huge basins goes direct to the same situation. Ah, sure, of course. Yes, of course. I don't have to have my net. So. Anyway, I can look for there, but so far away. But anyway, you see all these waters falling by the Tietê River here, or the Pinheiros River, or the Tamanduateí River. All these waters go in this direction now under the avenues. And so it was a huge engineering project that could transform the original basin in this kind of amazing engineering project. No, it's a huge work of engineering to make this thing happens to transform to this thing. But that costs a lot in environmental costs of this, no? But because you transform this natural solution that nature has been developing, so that's the natural solution for how do you deal with floodplains. No, you have all this way that nature had been developing eons for how to work with the seasonal way of the waters flows, waters storage, waters goes down. So you have these pulsations of the waters in the natural landscapes. And you try to make this in a different way because you thought that you was able to make this more intelligent than nature. So it all began when the city was built. In the beginning, the city was built as a small village in the top of a hill. In the beginning, the city was, the people were more humble, so they could make it very nice. They make it as a small village in the top of a hill. So you can see that in the beginnings, the city was very, very well suitable. They can survive, they can make with the waters in a very happy way. Very happy, I don't know, but anyway, they can see the waters not as something they can fight against, but something they can live in a very work way with. And this, as time goes by, even when they still can see as the centuries goes by, the water still can be seen in the city, in the landscape of the city, as something that could be, goes in these seasons, as something that could be worked with. But as this last century, when we got the money, we got the technologies, we got the machines, we got the grid to see all these open spaces that used to be served by the water, to be used by the water, as something that could be seen as real estate that could be used for most profitable uses, then you saw that only that for water should be waste of land to be used only for reserve water. Why? It's a waste of land to be let that water that's very well-located real estate be lost by water only. Why don't put this in real estate market and use that for build something useful for the city? So you take all the engineers work how you make this very useful lands for the city. So you'll make rid of all this water. And of course, you start to make all this very linear. You start to make all these very, very straight lines. No, you like straight lines, very more rational. You bait this in betterment projects. As you can see this here, this was one of the projects. There are several projects of this time. Because how we got the city like it's today, people like to say that the city was lack of planning. No, it's not lack of planning. The city gets what it is today because it's a lot of planning. It's a proposal. The city gets like it is today because there's a lot of projects, a lot of planning, a lot of money. It's not a lack of resources that the city's got what it is today. So you got what's got today because you got a lot of money, a lot of people thinking. It's a desire that the city became like it is today. So you got what you deserve of the city now. Anyway, this was one of the best projects that was never built because, as you see, even this guy is one of the main engineers of the beginning of the last century. He still thinks it's a more generous way because he let 2 small lungs for the waters there, but they were never built in the Tietê River because he lost these positions. But anyway, they call this project for the embetterment of the, they call this a commission for the embetterment of the Tietê River. So they thought the natural river is worst, so they have to put it in the better way. So the idea of that time is that the natural river is in worse situation, so the wetlands were something horrible. And still today, if you use the word in Portuguese, for example, brejo or várzea, it seems as a bad word. So you have to get rid of those areas full of water because they are something that seems as a backward word, something that's only for not nice people to live nearby. Anyway, so you have to get rid of those waters. And as you see, you got this, and it's interesting because then all this huge work of transforming all these city waters just started, and during it take a century to transform all that. And it was very interesting because this is one work did by one master student at the Cornell University in the USA, and she did her work just a few years ago. She did a study about all the loss of the length between the Tietê River, between 2 points between the Penha neighborhoods and the Cebolão, the point where the 2 rivers, the Pinheiros and Tietê rivers meet here, and saw how the distance, how the length the Euclidean length between the 2 points was lost, and how this costs for the quality of the water and all the velocity of the water in the city. So it was a terrible loss for the way, hydrological way, you lost for the Tietê River during this process of straightening the rivers in the city. And what you got? You got this. So that was the result of that. And so you got another weight. You have to go back to see what you did. So it starts to build another wave of work. That was what we call here piscinões. It's a second wave of fake floodplains. That was how you decide to put back the floodplains that you lost. You make these huge holes that starts to mimic what used to be the old use of the floodplains. But they are horrible, they are terrible. They make like eyesores in the middle of the city. Nobody could live in the city looking for these dirt holes in the middle of the city, because you have terrible quality of the water, you have something that stinks in the middle of the city, and you have something that's not necessarily landscape that the city deserves. You have this kind of horrible holes in the middle of the city. But anyway, this was something that goes as an emergency act, and city accept that, the people accept that, because they accept this kind of stuff, or they get drowned. So they okay, so we are in an emergency, now you have to get this or get that. So instead of this, you get that. So you got hostage of this situation, you get to accept this. So of course it's interesting, because all the engineers get a second amount of work, of projects, a lot of money went that, and went a lot of, it's a kind of a well of fortune for next people to build a lot of stuff, and a lot of politicians get well done with that, and was a wonderful world for a lot of people. So it's another generation, but in the end, this also proved to be inefficient. So you have to follow what you can do next to get away from that. So even now, we are looking for the next generations. You cannot stop in these solutions, because it's proved not to be so. You cannot stop in this solution anyway. You can look for next steps to go further, or look for that. So we start to look for what could be the next steps to look for this way. And so in this search for how you can start again in this huge problem that the city has created for itself, how you can start to look for how you deal with water inside of this huge basin. Of course, you had now occupied most of the area, you have impermeabilized most of this surface, you have created this hard surface above all the city, but now you need to open new holes in the city. You have to open areas for the water again. And so works like this that have been working by the engineers in the engineering school, and for the people in the municipality, they're doing plans, how these new areas for detention and retention ponds should be looking for. So they're doing new plans for the watershed plans. And interesting, because now they are starting to see we need to go further ahead of those emergential holes that you did in the first phase. You need to look further for that. In one of these works, we'll be able to start to talk with them. And so in a kind of initial steps, you'll be able to see, well, at least like to see how we can look around, at least in the frame of these areas, at least have a sidewalk, please, for God's sake, have a little sidewalk around these areas. Have something to start to talk about the neighbors. The neighbors need a little respect. You don't build just a wall in the front of their houses. You have to have something to talk to them, no? And so we start to think, hey, perhaps can build something like that. Of course, this is something that's very tentative. You don't have the project, exactly the project of that. You have only the volume of water that have to be restored. But this was the first renderings that were done with these areas. Perhaps there should be some idea of these new areas. Of course, if you see these areas totally built, they will never be able, if you say that you're going to build a park in an area that is totally built, you're going to clean up this area, build up, because there's a bus park, garages there, there's a lot of people, there are houses building theirs, but for building detention ponds, there's no problem. It's accepted to build, to clean up this area to build a detention pond. They don't have problems here in São Paulo if you say you need to build a detention pond, because the situation is so desperate and the people accept to be removed from their houses to be built detention ponds. But if you say, if you're going to build a park, of course, there will be a public revolt. People not accept to be built a public park. But anyway, if you build something like that, you'll be terrible, no? But anyway, perhaps you can accept to be built something like that. Best, I don't know, perhaps you can't do. I don't know, this is something to be tested. But people say, well, this is another idea that this is something that people from a neighborhood built for their own hands in a neighborhood. They just caved in a public square. They built this for their hands. It's a community that built by themselves. It's interesting because if people are doing that by their own hands, perhaps they'll be accepted. Perhaps the public works and the technicians in the city and even the academics are behind the sensibilities of the population. Perhaps the people in the city are more advanced than what the communities and what the high level of the technicians, etc., are able to accept, because they say the people are able to accept that urban roles, but perhaps people are more able to accept this other kind of works. And perhaps this is what they're building. This is another work done by people by themselves in another square here in São Paulo. Or like this is a place where they just start to break the pavements in the city. So perhaps people are starting to have this kind of mindset, more able to accept this than what the technicians are able to accept. And this is another project that started did last year here for the engineering school. This is an avenue in this area. And what we start to put all these green infrastructure areas. How many time I have already? 10 minutes. Oh, I need to go fast. And this, all the streets with all these areas, because these are different from the water, because as you start to see here, you have the opportunity to see for the whole watershed for this creek in the city. And so this is just this watershed on the side here of the campus. So you'll be able to start not to see only in the detention pond at the final line of the water, but for the whole watershed. So you'll be able to see all the modeling for this water that goes down to the detention pond. So of course, in the end, you should have these areas for retention of the water in the main basins, but you can treat, you are be able to do modeling in this project, all these runoffs that came from the main streets. And you can make, even in the most urban situations, when people say you cannot make any permeable paving here, you try to put some paving area here, and you build a primer in a manual that can show how you can put this green infrastructure here, and can be accessed by this platform. And so this is the view of the base in the watershed. We are here. We are here, no? This is the Pinheiros River, and this is the watershed that we studied. And the main creek is here. And this is the area where we have studied. And the main is interesting project here that this have been modeled all the water, and you have been thought about this dispersed green infrastructure for all this watershed. And this has been done by all the streets that when the main water, the runoff flows to the following the main pipes to the creek, so when it should be treated. But of course, this could be treated only the first flush of the rains. Of course, the main rain is still, the main volume of the water still flows down over these leads and goes down to the river. But then all this water that still goes down above this will be arriving the ends in the volumes that should be accommodated in the main areas. And so you start to think, instead of building only this huge piscinão, you can start to create some of these design solutions that could be based in natures, like this one. And looking back, you see that city already has this being done in the natures, the solutions back. And the area that the engineers had told us that should be where these models show where this detention ponds and retention ponds should be built. We start to apply some parametric designs that be built by using some models using a rhino, that's the model for 3D, plus that plugin, that grasshopper, and start to create some first models that start to apply this to create this. For example, it's just a new detention pond that came with the idea that could be working with the several. But what was the problem with the first generation of piscinões here in São Paulo? That stay empty all the time, because they should be empty all the time, because they should be waiting the next storm. But now, like this, we are thinking about a detention pond that can be, or a retention pond, that's the case here, inline detention pond, that we can be in a low flow that can be store some water there, like a wetland, and could be treating that small water, and so can flow in different levels, and so still be used in different times of the year, like original wetlands. And it gets different levels of water, excuse me. So you can have this totally full or not. And so you got to the headwaters of this water basin and see the other areas where this detention pond should be looking for, where the others should be taking the same amounts of the same principles for the next ones. And you also thought these other areas. Anyway, and so far in the end, we have this idea that we can think this applied for the next ideas of parks that could be harvesting the waters. This is for another manual, but I think that's this. I brought this here today because I think these are the three principles that you should be looking for. I don't know if you can look down here. You can see the three words that I think you should pursue. That's slow, spread, and soak. I think this is the main idea, that how you should be reversing the paradigm of the older way you deal with this last century way that you have dealt mostly here in São Paulo with the water, the drainage of the water here. That you start to reverse this. Of course, as you can see, you have perhaps already a mindset popping up in some ways in the middle of the city. You can see these small interventions happening in the city, but perhaps you can start to see how you can transform this in real work for the city, and perhaps that can be replicated in other cities in other parts of the world. And I think that perhaps for you that came from other parts of the world, this could be inspiring if you can see the water as in different climates and different settings, could also transform the water not as something that should be rid of, but something that could be part of the work of your landscapes, and how you can transform this as part of your everyday life, and how make this part of your asset that be gain of for your work in the cities that you live. That's something that I think that design of the landscape as an infrastructure and make this based on the nature-based solutions that we are working is something that could be inspiring for the work you are doing. That's what I have to bring you to discuss today. Thank you.
Thank you, Paulo, for a very nice presentation. We are going to have, after the presentations, the questions, and please, we are going to have more two presentations and a break, and after this, we have a discussion and questions about these presentations. And please write down your questions to give Paulo at the end of these sessions. Now I'm going to ask José Carlos Mieza to come to have a floor to his presentation. José Carlos Mieza is engineering, has a PhD in engineering and postdoc in Harvard University. His research is associated with water reuse, water and wastewater treatment. So, please, you have time to show your experience. Thank you very much for coming.
Well, thank you, Paulo, for the introduction, and thank you very much for everyone to be here. And thank you to Marcelo Nolasco also for the invitation. It's very nice to be here to share some thoughts about the solutions that you can have or that you can put together in order to solve complex problems in the cities, mainly urbanized areas. So I will change a little bit the gear from what Paulo Pellegrino has said. Of course, it's quite important what he said. Because the environmental planning or the land planning is quite important when you think about all the resources that you need to supply for a city, mainly the water, energy, and of course a clean environment and a priceable place to live. The basic idea now is I will present some thoughts about water use and how can water use can also collaborate with the problems of scarcity in large cities. So here you have my email. If you want some make contact, it's fine to me. So basically here at USP we have a laboratory which is the International Center of Water Reuse, which was created by the beginning of 2001. And since then, we are working with the industry and the municipalities for developing some kind of training and also projects, all of them related to water use. We started at the beginning with industries, and after that, we move our gear to work with the municipalities also. So we had developed a lot of manuals for water conservation and reuse for the industry and for the cities. And most of these manuals are being used now for developing this kind of solutions for coping with water scarcity in the region. So we have also the homepage of our lab. So if you want, you can access and have some information about what kind of research we are developing. So for starting the problem or to deal with the problem, we need to know what was the main cause of water scarcity in our region. One of them was well discussed by Paulo Pellegrino before because of the land use planning, which is quite important because it have a significant effect on the quality of life and also on the water resources that you have in the region. So the water scarcity problems is a combination of factors. It depends on the water availability or the natural quantity of water that you have in a place. The second one is how you keep the water in the place. So if you are able to keep the water in a quantity and quality that could be used, so you can minimize the problems of water scarcity. However, if you make the region grow too much or exceeding its support capacity, also you have problems of water scarcity. And finally, one of the problems that we have here in Brazil and in most developing countries are the lack of sewage treatment. So the problem is the water bodies contamination by the sewage, which is discharged without any kind of treatment or poorly treated, and of course the superficial drainage of the impervious area. So that are the main reasons that you can have for establishing a water scarcity problem in a region. So what we can do? So we change the land use, we change our way of life. We are using a lot of resource to keep your quality life standards. So we have, of course, many solutions or a combination of solutions that could be used for coping with water scarcity problems. Of course, the first one is the water conservation. I mean, you need to be aware how to use the water. The main problem sometimes is there is a lack of water or we are using the water in a wrong way. So most of the problems that you can identify here in São Paulo or in other regions is that use a lot of water without the need, its need. So nowadays you can have you can access a lot of new equipments, hydraulic equipments for using your homes or in your in commercial establishments and even in industries to have or to use less water than is used. I mean, some of taps that we have in the market today, we can have you can buy a tap that has a flow of 10 liters per minute, and the new ones has a consumption of only 3 liters per minute. So if you only change the hydraulic equipment, you can save a lot of water without any kind of complex solution. So the idea is go from the simple to the complex. So the simple way to cope with water scarcity is use better the water. So that's what we need to think. Of course, the industrial process also should be improved in order to have less water consumption in this process. So improving the equipment and process could be a good way for save the water. And of course, using new technologies for water and wastewater treatment to avoid the contamination of the clean water that you have, which can be, of course, increase the water availability for the region. And finally, you have the water reuse. I just put the water reuse as the last option because it is, of course, the last option. We need to go, as I said, from the simple or less expensive to the more complex and more expensive. So a lot of people argue that water reuse can be solve the problem, or claim that water reuse is the first option for water scarcity problem. Of course not. It's one of the solutions, but not the first one. We need to choose the easily one before and the cheapest one, and after that we can go to water reuse schemes. So I've been working with water reuse since 1991. So I'm the most interested on water reuse, but I know there's different options to deal with the water scarcity. But of course, sometimes or in some way you need to have water reuse. So for this reason, we need to be prepared for applying in a correct way the water reuse schemes. Not as most of people are spreading, that you can just collect the gray water from the shower and use directly. This is a very serious problem. You can have like outbreak of disease and other kind of health problems. So the idea is, if you plan go to water reuse, it should be well planned, in order you don't have problems with public health. So my talk will be specifically on water reuse. So when you think about the water scarcity problems in big regions like the metropolitan region of São Paulo or any other city in the world or urbanized city in the world, you need to think about what are the options to have a water reuse scheme. So most of the people think about the non-potable water reuse. So when you think on non-potable water reuse, you need to think in some problems that can arise from the implementation of these options, mainly related to the distribution system of water. So in most urbanized area, the most expensive part of the water treatment system is the distribution system and not the treatment. So now here in São Paulo, I think if you consider all the investment on water treatment and distribution, we have a distribution of 20% for the treatment and 80% for the distribution. So if you think on moving for a water reuse scheme, non-potable reuse scheme, you need to think about the costs that you need to invest for the distribution of this water. So the basic questions that we need to talk or think is, it's possible to implement a comprehensive water reuse scheme in an urbanized area. So what are the main constraints that we will have? I think the most important one is the economic one. So you need to have money to implement a secondary distribution system, which will not be cheaper. Of course, what the economic sector should be prioritized? So in many regions, you have the use of water for urban use, industrial use, agricultural use. So most people think the agricultural use is the most intensive consumer in many countries. If you take in account Brazil, maybe 60% of all the water that you use is for agriculture. But if you analyze the region individually or by regions, these numbers will change. If you go to a city or to a metropolitan region, you'll see a quite big difference. Here in the metropolitan region of São Paulo, maybe 80% of the water is used for urban use, and only 3% for agriculture. The difference is for industry. So when you implement a water use scheme, you need to think what are the capacity of the absorption of the reused water. So sometimes you think the industrial sector could be a good area to implement, but the amount of water that the industry consumes is quite low compared to the other areas. So in my presentation, you can see what else you need to consider. The reuse water potential or consumers, who will consume the water, the reused water. So you need to think this before implement any kind of water reuse scheme. The second one is the reused water quality, or the standards that we have to, I just drink the water to clean my throat. Yes. You know, all the water that you use is reused water, because the water is only one. There is no new water that we can produce. So the nature provides this reuse for us. But the idea is how we can mimic the nature to shorten the time to have the water quality restored. So the basic idea is what else you need to think. The water reuse quality requirements. This is quite difficult to establish, because anyone who wants to implement a water reuse scheme is waiting for a quality standard for someone. They ask for the government, they ask for the universities or for the other people who are experts on water use to define the water quality to be used. This is not a simple question to respond. So there is a lot of constraints that you need to consider. Even when you apply the reuse water for toilet flush, people think, you know, toilet flush is not a rigorous use. The quality should not be quite well, but it needs to have some quality. So what was the minimal quality that you need to have for water that will be used in a toilet flush? So you need to think in the risks that we have in your house. So if you have a pet, or if you have a children, of course the pet will drink the water in the toilet, or even the children can put their hands and also drink the water. So now, what is the problem? So we try to solve one issue or one question, but we can create a different one, mainly disease spread. So the idea is any water that you use in your house or in any place needs to have a specific quality to protect the people, to protect the equipment, and to protect the environment. So it's not so easy to define a water quality standard for reuse. Another thing is, what are the additional treatment that I will need to implement for produce this kind of water? So how much money I will spend, or which kind of technology are well appropriated for that? And the last one is the distribution system. I will put a centralized water reuse scheme, so I will need to have a distribution system that will cost a lot. Or I will have a small system for water reuse. And of course, the last one, from the point of view of engineering, is the most important, is the cost. How much it will cost for us to have this reuse water in a safe way. So it's not so straightforward to implement or to develop a reuse scheme. We need to consider all these topics before we go ahead with this. So as Paulo showed, here is the urbanized area of the metropolitan region of São Paulo. And we have basically 5 large distribution wastewater treatment systems which is in red on the dots. And this is the most of the house. So think about to produce the reused water in one place here and distribute to the city. It's quite complex. So you need to invest a lot of money to implement a distribution system. It's not feasible, economically feasible. You can go to other ways in order to try to save the water before go to this strategy. But of course, it's possible to implement for some specific case. In the case of industrial complex, but it is also the reuse feasibility is completely linked with the urban use planning. So you need to plan the reuse water users close to the wastewater treatment plants in order to avoid to convey the water for large distance. This will make the system be more efficient. So if you don't have this kind of planning, it's quite hard to make feasible any reuse scheme. Of course, the reuse scheme will be feasible if you can maybe have some profit regarding that, or it's crucial to have this reuse scheme, mainly for non-potable reuse. One of the projects that we have here in the metropolitan region of São Paulo is the Aquapolo project. It's the largest reuse scheme in the South America, one of the 10th largest in the world. The idea was to use this treated sewage from a wastewater treatment plant, complement its treatment using advanced technologies, and produce reused water for a petrochemical complex. So why this project was make it feasible? Because there was no water to increase the capacity of production of this industrial complex. So the way that since the pre-salt was discovered, the idea was to increase the capacity of oil production in the refineries that we have here. But for do this, we need to have water. The Aquapolo project is located on a region, or the petrochemical complex is located in a region that there is no water available for increase its capacity at that time. We didn't have. So the idea was, if I use the treated sewage from one of the wastewater treatment plant that we have, we can solve this problem. So this project started, the conception of this project started by 2001, only for you have an idea of the time that you took for make the decision. So in 2001, people started to think about the water reuse scheme for the petrochemical complex. A lot of options have been developed, and the only one that survived was the water reuse scheme. So the decision making for implementation of the water reuse scheme was taken in 2010, and 2 years after that they implemented the Aquapolo project. So the capacity of the Aquapolo is 1,000 liters per second, which is enough to supply a city with 500,000 inhabitants, which is quite large. And they use the treatment technologies, the tertiary system for nutrients removal with an MBR reactor, and the reverse osmosis system for the effluent polishing. So here we have the scheme of the water reuse unit. So you have on your left, the biological reactor tank for nutrient removal. The membranes are inside of this tank. The reverse osmosis unit and the petrochemical complex. What was the main issue related to this project. The distance from the reuse plant to the consumer. This installation is located 17 kilometers far from the industrial complex. As I said, the distribution system sometimes or most of the time are more cost-consuming part of the system. Only to have an idea, 60% of the investment was for the construction of the distribution line. Only 40% was used for construction of the treatment system. But of course, it was necessary. The industry was very happy because of the system, because they like it a lot, because the quality of the water that is produced is quite high compared to the ones that they used before. Here's an image of the wastewater treatment unit from Sabesp. And here is the Aquapol, which is the unit that produces the reused water. You see, all this treatment plant has a capacity of 1.5 cubic meters per second. And if you look at this system that produces 1 cubic meter per second, you see it's quite small. That's because of the membrane technology that make it possible. If you use modern technology, you can save a lot of space for the installation of the treatment systems. Here we have some pictures of the biological reactor and also the membrane tanks where the membranes are inside, the water that is produced in the biological reactor, and the reverse osmosis skids. So now they practically treat all the wastewater using the reverse osmosis system too. At the beginning of the project, they would use the osmosis reverse system only 20% of the time. But because of some quality issues, they need to use all the time. And of course, which is important, is the cost. I don't know if it's quite small, but we can have it here is in reals. The first line here is the reused water production cost. Basically, the cost of production using that technology was 1 real per cubic meter, which means 25 cents of dollar per cubic meter. And this line here, the red one, is the distribution system cost, almost 50 cents of dollars per cubic meter, which make the system quite expensive considering the distance for take the water from the reuse station to the consumer. The initial idea was to construct the wastewater treatment system 2 kilometers far from the complex. But because of political issues, the decision make was quite different, which had a huge impact on the costs of the water treatment. And nowadays, most of the countries are thinking about direct potable reuse, which is done already in maybe Africa, Namibia. The Windhoek project, since the 60s, have a potable reuse scheme. So the idea of the water reuse scheme is you have technology to produce safe water using any kind of source. So instead of produce non-potable water, which you need to have a secondary treatment distribution system, if you treat the water in a way that it is in accordance to the drinking water quality standards, you can use the same distribution system to distribute the water. So we'll only have the cost for the treatment system. So we did some experiments at Sanasa. Here is some news about the use of potable reuse in the United States, Australia, and also here in South Africa and Australia also. And considering this, the WHO just published guidelines for water reuse schemes or potable reuse. So now, even the guidelines that is proposed by the WHO permits that you produce reused water from sewage. So you have the guidelines. Now we can, of course, go to this way and study better. Here I will show the project that we developed at the Sanasa. Sanasa is the municipal company in the city of Campinas, and they implemented the wastewater treatment using MBR system, and they are proposing, or they try to study the direct potable reuse. So were hired to develop this research. So it took 6 months of pilot plant. So we devised a water treatment scheme that combines basically 5 kinds of technology. So the sewage comes from an MBR system. It passes through a UV light disinfection system, a reverse osmosis system, and after that we can use photochemical advanced process or even adsorption in activated carbon or ozonation or a combination among all these technologies. So we study each one and the combination of all of them. And here is the picture of the pilot plant. It's a pilot plant with a capacity of 350 liters per hour. And here we have the results of our research. So we compare the quality of water obtained in our unit with the standard established for drinking water. So in this column, where is the column? This orange one is the standard, and on the right you can see this one is the quality of the first column besides the orange one is the quality of the sewage treated by the MBR system. If you look here on the parameters, you see most of the parameters are in accordance with the drinking water quality standards. There are only 2 that are not in accordance, which is heterotrophic bacteria and also color. And most of the arrangements that you analyzed were able to produce drinking water with the quality established by our regulations. Of course, the main problem is what are the problems with toxicity. So we identified that only one arrangement which combines reverse osmosis and advanced oxidation process was able to produce a water without any problems of toxicity. So this was the arrangement that was established. And of course you can have also the decentralized reuse schemes that also we worked. One of the most remarkable that we implemented was at the Copacabana Palace in Rio de Janeiro, which was one of the most maybe important hotel in the city of the Rio de Janeiro. And they implemented a water reuse scheme for producing water for cooling tower. So 3 cubic meters per hour. So this is the system, and I have a video, but I think it will not be possible to show you. And to come to my conclusions, very quick. You know, the problem of the lack of planning in large regions in Brazil and other parts of the world induce a lot of problems of water, natural resources scarcity, mainly water. So you need to address these problems in an integrated way. So you need to go through the better use of the natural resource, a better planning of the cities, and also you can complement these actions by the water reuse schemes. And of course, one thing that is quite important on environmental field is the innovation. So we need to use the innovation in our favor. So in the environmental area, it's quite difficult to, some people argue that you don't need to have innovation. But you are only able to improve our quality or our quality of life or standard of environmental quality using innovation. Otherwise, you have a lot of problems with this way to use our resource and occupy our areas. So that is, thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Dr. José Carlos. Very nice presentation, and so good examples about reuse water in São Paulo. It was very interesting to discuss how to link the reuse with natural based management. It will be interesting to discuss this after our break. Now we have the third presentation, Water Governance and Social Participation, the experience from Cape Town, South Africa. I would like to invite Chris Carden. Yes, he's a researcher coordinator for the Interdisciplinary Research Institute, Future Water, at the University of Cape Town, South Africa. She has a background in water management and holds a PhD in civil engineering from UCT. Thank you very much for coming and have a good presentation. Thank you very much.
Okay. Good morning, everybody. As said, I'm the research coordinator for Future Water Research Institute. We are a cross-disciplinary institute at the University of Cape Town that was set up specifically to look at issues of water scarcity in the country. As you'll see from my presentation, it is a water-scarce country. In any case, the drought had made things a lot worse, but we certainly have had to work towards dealing with water scarcity for some time. Let's carry on. Not that one. That one. Okay, so I guess many of you have seen this before, but water scarcity has now been pitched as one of the top world sort of economic risks. This was from the World Economic Forum in 2015, and it's been reiterated in years since then. That is saying that at that point, water crisis, water scarcity was noted as the top economic risk. And we have to take this into account. It's not only around how much water is available for people in cities, but what impact it has on economies of urban areas at a very large scale. So just to put it in context, sub-Saharan Africa is one of the largest growing water users in the world. And you can see from this, can I use my, yes I can. You can see from this graph that municipal and domestic demand is growing over time. There's been a 283% change in water demand since 2005. So it's phenomenal. That's the pointer. Thank you, thank you. It is phenomenal in terms of the growth of water demand, and we have to actually deal with this in different ways. And you've heard some of those ways this morning through nature-based solutions, through water reuse. These are all different strategies that need to be put into the water resource management of our cities. Urbanization is another major problem. In South Africa, there are many people coming into cities. By 2030, we expect to be well over 70% urbanized, and this obviously also has impacts. So just to put it in context, this was a study that was done by the Institute of Security Studies in South Africa that looked at the total supply, and you can see the blue line is the total supply line that we have of water for all purposes, so industrial, agricultural, domestic. The purple dotted line at the top is the unconstrained scenario. It's the graph showing the demand at the moment, which shows a very scary gap between supply and demand by 2035. And even the green line, which is what they call the constrained scenario, which is moving agricultural use, it's lowering the domestic demand very, very aggressively. Even that is left with a substantial supply deficit by 2035. So we have to start thinking very differently about what we do in terms of water scarcity in the country. And these are some of the things that have come through. This came through the World Wildlife Fund, WWF, that has started to put a lot of infographics out to try and explain to people what needed to be done in terms of reducing demand. And obviously, the first and foremost is to reduce domestic demand, but to fix leaks, to reduce non-revenue water. We have an average of about 36-37% in South Africa, which is wasted before it reaches consumers. And then you've heard all this. Yesterday Monica was telling us about treated wastewater, the issues with that, and then obviously looking at increasing groundwater extraction as a very underdeveloped resource in the country. So we've stolen this too much, too little, too dirty thing. We've been using it for some time already. And we certainly have a major problem with it in South Africa. We have a country where there are low rainfall rates, high evaporation, as I've spoken about, urbanization, population growth, many services backlogs. Many people do not have access to certainly basic sanitation. Most people now have access to water, but drainage and sanitation are really problematic, leading to major pollution problems in the country, poor water quality. Leakage I've spoken about, and then the idea of poverty and inequality coming into this mix, the social issues that are involved. So this picture is it was an intense storm in the city of Johannesburg. This is quite common these days, that the stormwater infrastructure does not cope with the intensity of the rainfall that comes during these big summer storms, and this is the sort of flooding that you get. This is a picture of our main supply dam, and I'll go into that in more detail. This was taken earlier this year when we were in the grips of the worst of our drought. It's the Theewaterskloof Dam. And this is a very common picture, no doubt to many of you as well, because you are all from developing countries. Informal settlements, poor drainage, bad infrastructure provision leads to very low water quality, very poor water quality issues running through cities as a whole. So where's Cape Town? You may have seen some pictures. It's a very beautiful place at the tip of Africa. That's our relatively newly built soccer stadium for the World Cup in 2010. Table Mountain in the background. So we are right at the bottom of Africa. For those who don't know, I'm sure most of you do know where we come from. Cape Town is not really like any other African city in terms of what it looks like and how it feels. So the Western Cape water supply system is an interconnected system. All the water that is provided to Cape Town comes from 6 major supply dams. There are a couple of very small ones, but 99% of the water comes from these big supply dams that are situated outside of the city, 60 to 70, 80 kilometers away from the city, and piped into the network. They are all interconnected, so there is a way of moving water from area to area. And they're also managed principally by the national government. So similar to Brazil, we have a 3-tier system, which is federal or national, provincial, and then down to municipal. Municipalities are responsible for the delivery of services, so the actual bulk infrastructure, the dams, desal plants, that sort of thing, would be managed by national government, and the pipe networks within cities and the sewage works that treat the wastewater would then be managed by municipalities. And I'm telling you this because it has a bearing on how we dealt with the drought and what the governance implications of that were. So one of the interesting things from this slide is that, and I'm not sure if you can see it, but the 64%, about 2/3 of the water is used by the city of Cape Town, which is a city of about 4 million people. 7% is used by smaller towns on the outskirts of the city, and 1/3 is used by agriculture within the Western Cape system, which is a very important economic activity in the Western Cape. It provides most of our GDP. So there is already a contested resource application there between domestic and agricultural use. So the water demand has been climbing along with population, tracking it quite nicely actually over the years, which is what we would expect. As population growth goes up, then water demand generally goes along with it. What we did do around 2000, or what the city of Cape Town did, they came to a point in their planning where they realized they were going to get to a situation where they ran out of water. They approached the national department, and the national department said, no more dams until you sort out your water demand management. So they did, very, very aggressively, to the extent that in 2000 they decoupled that demand from the population growth almost entirely. They brought water demand leakage rates down to less than 15%, which is pretty much world standard. And they started, and for a long time the demand sort of carried on pretty much on that same level. It turned out to be a bit of their undoing, actually. It turned out to be a problem, because once you've brought that demand down, it's very difficult to go any further when you actually hit a crisis. So they had done a lot of planning. They'd looked at bringing in different augmented schemes over certain years, phasing them in as they needed the water over the years. And, you know, they'd been working quite well for 20 years or so before we were hit with the drought. And this is the sort of drought that we were hit with. This is accumulated rainfall. The purple area shows the sort of average band of rainfall that usually falls on the city. The 3 dark lines at the bottom were 2015, 2016, and 2017. This is the 2018 tracking that comes here. Most of our rainfall's in wintertime, which is now. Between sort of June and September is the bulk of our rainfall. These 3 years were below anything we'd ever seen. So the accumulated impacts of these 3 years of very low rainfall, which did come off the back of an El Nino event, but were not necessarily linked to that El Nino. The accumulated impact was a drought in the region of about 1 in 1,000 years recurrence. So it was nothing that a water resources manager could have planned for. The planning is usually in place for a 1 in 50 year occurrence, and this one really caught the city unawares. There is another graph that shows where that rainfall in 2015, 16, and 17 fell. It was below anything that we had seen previously. So this is when our mayor came out in January 2018. So we'd been on restrictions, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little bit later. But she came out in January 2018 literally with a wagging finger and said, Cape Town, if you don't start saving water, we are going to run out. And this is the date that we're going to run out, April the 12th. And she put that in writing. She actually shouted at us all from her radio or television interview and said, this is now going to happen. You've got to sort it out. And so there was in some ways, a bit of blind panic, because people suddenly realized that there was a potential that they were going to hit this so-called day zero. And what happened is that many people started collecting their own water from natural springs coming out of the mountain. I mean, you even had people fighting for water. You couldn't get plastic containers anywhere. There were no buckets to be had in any shop. It was the typical human reaction of, hoarding to try and make sure that people were going to be all right. And so, there were a lot of different feelings, I guess, that came out of this. Disbelief and anger. There was blame and this panic or water hoarding. Queues at natural springs. And this was interesting. I mean, many of the springs that we have are not monitored by the city. So many of them potentially could be polluted. And yet people thought that it was safer for them to collect water at springs than to wait and see whether we were going to run out or not. There was a large-scale grey water use, so we're all still standing in buckets in our showers and using that shower water to flush our toilets, even though it is not an ideal situation. When you are limited to very small amounts of water, you do what you have to do. Lots of people installed rainwater tanks, massive sinking of boreholes amongst the wealthy, particularly those who could afford it. Thousands and thousands and thousands of people sunk boreholes, and the impact of that has yet to be determined. We don't know what the impact of that groundwater abstraction is. And then, of course, private water treatment systems, and getting into the spirit of it. So what was it? This graph just shows the sort of the decreasing amount of water available in our dam system over those years, and you can see the downward trend from 2015. And of course it was predicted, as I say, in January 2018, that if we followed that same trend, we would hit day zero in April. Day zero didn't mean we ran out of water entirely. It meant that our dam systems got to a collective capacity of 13.5%, at which stage the city was going to implement disaster management, and we would have to go and get water from distribution points around the city. So they had planned for 200 distribution points. People were going to be allowed to collect 25 liters per person per day, and that was your allowance. So this is a more recent. This graph was taken now at the end of August. So this point here is 27th of August. This black line is the tracking of how much water was available in our dam system from November 2017, and you can see. So the pink area here. This line down here is the 13.5%. When we started in November 2017, we got to about January, and suddenly that line was looking like it was going to hit 13.5% much earlier. What did happen was that people really started saving water. They lowered consumption hugely, so the line flattened off a bit. There was also some water that we got back from agriculture. Agriculture were then squeezed very hard in terms of what they could use, so there was a bit more water that was left in the system. And then happily, it started to rain in about May or June. So we had good rains in May or June. It's sort of leveled off now. And as you can see, this is our critical zone here, up to about, it's about 65%, I think, that we're aiming to get to. And it's sort of looking as if we'll probably get to around 70 this year. Restrictions will not be lifted until the dams are at 85%. So we're still standing in buckets for the next 6 months at least, I should imagine. So, yeah, we had preservation restrictions. We reduced our daily use down to 450 megs a day through intensive pressure management and installation of water management meters. And that is still what's happening at the moment. If we get to 13.5%, the water's cut off to all except essential services. And once the reservoir's at 10, then it is a full-scale disaster, and we will have to import drinking water. So the city's response has been threefold: through demand management, the management of the dam system itself, and also around augmenting water, so creating this new water, these different alternative water resources that can come into our system. Water restrictions started as early as 2005, so we have been aware that water scarcity is a problem. They really ramped up from 2016 once the drought was there, and even then the city didn't really realize that we were going to get into the trouble that we did. So we started on a 20% saving in 2016. By February 2018, we were down to 50 litres per person per day. I don't think there's anywhere in the world, any city in the world, that has aggressively put their restrictions at that level. The Australian millennium drought were about 120 litres per person per day. Even in California, it was over 100. So I'm not sure what it was here in Sao Paulo. Monica didn't tell us yesterday, but certainly 50 litres is quite severe. So there's been a lot of information, and one thing the city has been recognized for, it took them a little bit of time, was that they now provide information to private citizens on an ongoing basis. There's no excuse for not knowing where we are in terms of water scarcity in the city. And to try and lower demand, they very aggressively pushed out this water dashboard. We were told every day you could log on to see what date the day zero had moved to. You could see how much water the city was using. You could see what level the dams were at, and how many Cape Townians, this 37% here, were adhering to the restrictions. So there was a bit of a punitive thing there as well. The water management devices were very contentious. They were installed, thousands and thousands and thousands of them, into properties. They're water management meters that cut off at a certain point, and they were installed into properties that used too much water, rich or poor alike. So these things started out being implemented in poor areas as to stop defaulters, payment defaulters. But there are many, many more of them now in extremely wealthy areas that were just using water because they could pay for it. So that has been quite contentious. The weekly dam levels are still being monitored. As I say, we're now at 62%. It is going up now because we're having rain. And interestingly, we're still managing to keep quite low. That demand of 513 megs a day has come down from 1,200 2 years ago. So we've halved our demand, which has been quite something. The water tariffs have been changed hugely. So linked to the water restrictions, there have been very significant tariff increases. And I did a calculation here in February 2016, if a household used 36 kiloliters a month, which at that time was probably fairly average, if you had many of us live in houses with swimming pools and gardens, it's very common, so outdoor use of water is quite high. In February 2016, your monthly bill would have been around 700 Rand, which is about 250 Real. Now it's 10 times that, if you use the same amount of water. So there's been a quite exceptional increase in tariff. So then what the city did as well was that they put in place behavioral nudges. Sorry, this should have popped up. And what they did was that they created maps which showed how you and your neighbors were doing. So you could suddenly see if your neighbor was using more than their allowed 6 kiloliters a month, then they got a white dot on their property, which was also quite interesting, and how it made people think about, who was living in their street. And we all sort of, stood up and got very cross with those that we could still see watering their gardens or doing the things that they weren't supposed to be doing. So it did push a behavior in that regard. There's also the real-time feedback through the dashboard. There was some social recognition of people that were the real good savers. And the city actually working on cooperating with people as well. Lots of guidelines, ways to save water. As I say, nobody flushes toilets anymore with potable water. So it's, these are activities that need to be kept in place. The dams have been very, very carefully monitored over time. The red line there is sort of tracking. It's now gone up significantly. the red line at the bottom, and we look as if we're more or less on track for 2016 levels at the moment, but the city is very carefully watching that. They're also looking at how to put in new water, and I actually added in this slide on Perth because it's quite an interesting comparison. Perth started in the 1950s with a very similar reliance on surface water and then a very small amount of groundwater. They soon realized that this was not sustainable. So they've put in a system over the last 50 years where they've completely changed their supply system from this 92% surface to a predicted 2022 use of water where they will have no reliance on surface water storage at all. Dams will only be used for agriculture, and the water that they use in their city supply system will come from desalination, groundwater, and recharge. So we know we've been doing something like that, reshaping Cape Town's supply. We now have large production boreholes to tap groundwater. We're looking at sewage reclamation, what we've just heard about, and of course desalination of seawater because we are at the coast, although we hope not to go into large-scale desal. There was obviously a media frenzy around this water crisis, and many of us became instant celebrities, much to our horror, because we were constantly being interviewed about the drought and what we thought where it had come from and who was to blame. There were even some crazy things that came up, people deciding that towing icebergs from the Antarctic would help us. And it went into feasibility studies. These were people that were really serious about solving the water crisis in Cape Town. I had one man from Alaska who phoned me and said he would send super tankers with water from Alaska to Cape Town, which I politely declined. But we had some crazy schemes. And I think from a governance point of view, why did we come so close? There were definitely issues around the sort of the scales of governance levels, with national government not talking to local government and not coming up with early enough decisions. The access and use of information was a problem. Obviously, finance, risk management, and long-term decision-making all played into this bigger problem. And the barriers that were in place was, the link to province and national took a long time. So before even a disaster zone could be declared in the province, it took months and months and months of negotiation, which left out very precious time to start getting the finance going. Poor communication in the beginning, although that really did improve. And then the challenge of securing funding was a real problem, as we heard yesterday. As you decrease demand, you decrease revenue to the city, and so you decrease the ability for them to be able to put in schemes to sort things out. Enablers, we've seen many things working much better than we have before, working across departments, moving departments together. They've set up a water resilience committee. It's prompted a new water strategy. There are impressive levels of project management at the city, very good data sharing. So these are all wonderful wins that have come out of the crisis. So I think the 5 key lessons, and I'm finished now, is that climate change is not a slow onset disaster. It hits you in the face like a steam train. And I think that's what we've heard, that is what we've learned from this. Nobody could have planned for this. And the planning for this uncertainty involves completely new ways of doing things. We can't use the same models that we've used in the past. We can't look at the climate predictions as we have previously because things are just not the same. Cities should lead. They can't depend on their national government counterparts to support them. And cities have to put in place the sort of structures, the green infrastructure solutions, the alternative water resources that we need to see very strongly on their own. Measuring and monitoring is really important. Public awareness is essential, and we need to have those supportive governance processes, those policies and regulations that allow us to do things differently to what we've done before. So yeah, this is it. keep water in the town and city. That's what we keep. It's our mantra at the moment. Optimize and integrate the management of all water resources in a city space, and create livable urban areas that place high value on water and strive to increase water use efficiency through water-sensitive urban design, which is one of our very strong research focus areas at the city, at the university. And that's me.
After this long break, please, I would like to invite all to come to have this questions and answers, please. I would like to invite Paulo Pellegrino to come back to the table, José Carlos and Kirsti Carden. Please. Feel free to choose your place. So we have a time to have some questions and answers. Please, I think there is a mic to help us to listen the questions. I don't know if you have already written the questions to start our debate. If you want to raise your hands to ask for the mic to give us this interesting debate, please. I know that the first will be very important person to break the ice, not the
Marcel
iceberg.
Has a question. Marcel has a question.
Marcel, please.
First, I would like to say that I like very much all the three presentations. Congratulations for the speakers. My questions is general is for the three. It's nice to see that different visions, perspective for the semi-problem. I mean, having the water as the axis and the technology, the natural systems, and also the way of the governance aspect. I mean, and usually when we go for the engineering conference, we see in different sessions, this is just for water session, this is just for wastewater session, this is for what. And now we have the opportunity to put together in the room all the topics that integrate the topic. So looking for the presentation of Cape Town and also the problem of São Paulo, we have a lot of just gray infrastructure, not that much green, and we don't have the advanced treatment for water, neither wastewater. Thinking about what we can learn from each other, that if we could propose so mid and long-term solutions for water, how you three guys, if you go to the room to discuss and present a kind of proposal for us to show for our politics or for the decision makers how the three kind of visions could help for them to understand and prepare a better way of solving the water problem, the scarcity mainly. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Marcelo, for your question. I think it's very interesting just to, this session was very interesting to link these different aspects for water management, and I think a very interesting question about this. Please, who wants to talk first? Ladies first.
Ladies first, okay. Thank you. Yeah, it's a big question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, I think for me, this notion of resilience building in the ability for cities to not only adapt, but to ensure that they can absorb the shocks that are still going to come from the impacts of climate change and other things that we're going to see in this planet, is really important. So we heard yesterday around from Monica, around building in redundancy and having the ability for systems to cope. I don't think that's enough. I think we have to build cities that also enable us to live in spaces and be productive in spaces and have the ability to use the resources that we have in a much more purposeful way. So, you know, she referred to water reuse, for example, wastewater reuse as a demand management strategy. I strongly disagree with that. I think that we have to start building in all of these different resources in a very effective way so that we do it in a strategic way with the use of green infrastructure. And I'm really hoping that Paolo will add to this, to make our cities these livable places, to make them places that work in our benefit and that actually become resource providers in and of themselves. For too long, we've relied on the external environment to provide us with the resources that we need. And actually, we sit in these spaces that we can start using them. So for me, I mean, it's all things about reducing demand, about getting people to value the resources that they use. It's about linking the governance processes and trying to have the supportive and creative environment within our cities. But it's a mind shift in terms of how we think about what we do.
Yes, I cannot agree more with my colleague here. And I think that we are not suffering from lack of water. We are suffering for misuse of water, mostly. And I think that we should learn more about how we can use more wisely the water we have and how we can put more intelligent effort in making a design for our cities that take advantage of the resources that you have. And if you can learn from nature how you can put these technologies that already been in our advantage in this planet for us, and can you make these more adaptations for our work in cities and making our regions in cities more able to take advantage of these technologies in a way less, not necessarily naturalized as images or the pristine nature, but in a way that became a way of taking, for example, using water. We waste the water that falls in our cities. Of course, in São Paulo is a very humid area, but we lost all the water that falls in our cities because at the same time that's touched the soil, it became dirt. You lost all this water through the channels that got this water out of the city. You don't get this, you don't harvest these waters in a way that could be useful for use. You don't use these watersheds, for example, that you could be managed to recharge our menations, our areas that can be feeding our springs for use for cities. So anyway, all these potentials that you can get from the water bodies in cities, how you can make this urban fabric more friendly to the water and make this whole body of built environments that can be more easily as seen as a machine that can be worked with the water and purify the water and treat this water as something that can be reused in several ways by the inhabitants and make this like a beautiful machine that be worked with the city as something that the open spaces of the city can be seen as a dispersed system for treatment of the water, then perhaps you can have like in Cape Town or like in São Paulo or any other of our cities, some of these spaces of these cities that can be seen as machines for purifying our waters and storage these waters, and can be used as something that can be more sustainable for our future. Even in cities that have scarcity of water, I think that our buildings are our structures that can be seen as some places that can be cisterns, can be places to be storing water, purifying water, and make these some places that can be machines for working as areas for making the water something more achievable and at the time when you need to be there for our use. So I think that landscape of our cities are essentially not only open spaces for going by car or using by other uses that are commonly associated with. They could be seen as huge areas for treatment of water, and also for all the botanizing of the cities, or all the possibilities are your open spaces. And our buildings also, all the envelopes of the buildings also could be seen as something that could be used for making the water something that could be more present in the cities and make it more achievable for everyone.
Please. Thank you.
Okay. I completely agree what the previous people talked. Of course, as I said in my presentation, the water management in cities are quite complex, and the complex problem needs to be solved by integrated approaches. You don't have only one approach to tackle with the problem of scarcity in the cities. So, of course, the planning, the environmental planning, the water use planning is quite important. The land use planning is also quite important. We need to have a governance on water, so the legislation should be quite well established. And of course, in somehow we need the technology. It's not possible to have this kind of quality of life that we want in the cities, only with maybe projects or better arrangements of the land use. Because in any case, you like produce residues and wastewater, so we need to manage it. And of course, the wastewater and other things are quite important to be managed, but to increase the capacity of the environment to recover its quality, or at least to not to degrade too much the environmental quality. So the idea is put all these people together, and there is no unique solution. So sometimes it will be different from country to country, and even inside a country, it's quite different, the approach that you can use. Sometimes you can, if you are planning a new development, it's easy to start all the things like to have landscapes and buildings and so far. The other case is where you have the city established. So how to move from a condition that you don't have any of these amenities or structures to a more like safety or more reliable environment. So you need to use all the tools that you have. So it's important to take it in account. So there's no a magic solution or a bullet of a silver bullet that will solve the problem. So you need to evaluate each problem in a different way and propose the best solution for the case that you have. There's no a recipe already done for just to implement. That's it.
Thank you very much. I have only a comment that's important to say, maybe provoking the members of the table. I think one important thing, for example, in São Paulo, we have a crisis in 16, and there was a lack of information and transparency around this, how to manage the water. So I think we have sometimes a good project, good ideas, but it's important to include the population in this decision-making process. So I would like to ask you how to, for example, dealing with some kind of nature-based management or technological aspects, or even related to information, how to dealing with how much water each person has to have each day, how this could be better informed, or better transparency in the information. And this, I think, for example, in São Paulo, I don't know if Monica Porto said this, was very a lack of information. For example, we have reduced water from some regions in São Paulo, and that was not advised before. So the poor people or that don't have water for days, or so we because also they don't have a small reservoir or house reservoir to keep the water during this period that there is no water supply. So I think it was one important aspect to discuss and to find the solutions in the city is also to involve the people in this process. I think it's, I don't know, in South Africa and Cape Town, there was information and or the people was aware about this, as you said, as news and so on. But it's important to have this transparency in management.
Thanks. I mean, I couldn't agree more. There was a real problem at the beginning of the Cape Town drought around communication. There were many mixed messages about how much water you were allowed to use, what your monthly levels were, what you could be using water for, what you'd be paying for it. There was lots of sort of strange information that wasn't getting across clearly to educated people, to people that had access to the internet even, you know, that sort of thing was problematic. So the city put in an enormous amount of effort. They got public relations consultants, and they really did. They've now got a system that even for the poorest of the poor, there is information available on how the drought is being managed and what they should be doing on an individual basis. So there is that. But there's also a great void, I suppose. What is missing is that people don't get involved in the decision-making process. And it is very difficult in a city. I mean, Cape Town only has 4 million. There are 22 million here. How on earth do you involve 22 million people? But I think there is a potential for what we're starting now in Cape Town, and I guess you probably have something quite similar here, is developing a water management strategy within the city, so that you look at the resources as a whole, and how do you start building that at a citywide scale. And in the visioning process for that strategy, there should be opportunities for stakeholder engagement at every level, at every income level, across religions, across culture, across all sorts of different groups of people, so that you get input as to what's acceptable and not. And it's interesting, in Durban, in South Africa, they had a real problem. They were piloting a treated wastewater scheme. They got it right to the end. They got through all the environmental impact applications, all the permitting issues. Right as they were about to switch the taps on, one small community in the area that they were going to switch the taps on went, "No, we won't drink that water. Sorry, you're not putting it into our system." So those are the sorts of things that, if you haven't done your engagement at a proper level, it can completely railroad what you are trying to do in terms of the broader scheme and the broader strategy. So I think it's incredibly important, and it's part of this. Drought has provided Cape Town with a wonderful opportunity, I think, and we say never waste a good crisis. So what it has done is taught us what we now need to do to prepare for the future. So there's many processes going.
Just a comment, very short. Here in Brazil and also in São Paulo, we have a watershed committee. So normally there are three parts. It's a municipality, state, and civil society to manage the water. So there's a water management committee that discuss the decisions and to how to use the water and so on. So we have already some legislation that promote this participation from the people. But in that situation, the crisis, these people was not invited to discuss. So the decision was very in a short and close arena.
This is one I want to put something in this discussion. When we talk about green infrastructure and these nature-based solutions, I think one thing that we should put as most strategical in these solutions are also that they give more awareness to, from people, from what's happening in the water. Because if you see in the traditional way that the drainage and the treatment of the water does for the people, the dealers in cities, and they hidden the water from people. So if it has a popular saying that say, it's away from the sight, is away from the heart. So if you don't see the water, you don't take care of that. So if you hidden the water in the gutters, in the pipes, in the hidden channels, people don't care. So if you put your rivers under the avenues or away from the view of the people, it doesn't matter. People see that's only sewage channels and don't want anymore to take care of those rivers, that water. So if the traditional way of dealing with the water in the city was mostly responsible for the way that people don't care anymore for the water in the city, because it makes it as something that's not desirable, that's not seen. So if you ask for anybody in a squad or in a community in the periphery of the city, what they want for their creek, they want to be put in a pipe and buried under the grounds, because what they saw in the rest of the city. So this alienation from the water that became as a consequence of the way you treated the water in the city, as I show it, the way as you treated the water in the city, is a direct consequence of the way you treat the water. So you need to bring back the rivers back to the daylight. You need to bring the creeks back to daylight. You need to bring the runoff of the rain back to daylight. You don't need to do reading that back in the gutters, in the how do you say that, the boca de lobos. I don't know how to say that. When you put in the rain pipes that goes below the sidewalks, because that's the way everybody seems that's get rid of the sewage, get rid of all the dirt, and it disappears as a magic from your view. That's not resolving anything to get rid of the water. So this way of dealing with the water is mostly responsible of our paranoia of how you deal in the water. You think that you get rid of that water, but that way you get rid of all the water that you need also. So it's totally insane. You cannot survive in that way. So you should bring back this water again to the city. You should show off to the people that you are responsible for the quality of the water that runs in front of your house. You don't throw the garbage in this gutter in front of your house, because if you throw the garbage there, you go back to the creek and go back to the watershed that you used to take water for your drink. No? Even the animals, the jaguars that don't pee in the river, they drink below. So anyway, so you have to take care of what you're drinking. You have to make again this link between the water you take care of, the water you use, and you lose that. You thought that you only, as a kind of magic, you only turn off your faucet and it came the water from somewhere, I don't know, and the water disappears in the sink of your your bathtub. Doesn't happen that way. Always an integrated system. So you have to take responsibility of the water and make it visible again for everyone. So that's one of the possibilities that the green infrastructure has make it visible again in all its system, from the front of the rooftop of your house, from the sidewalk in front of your house, from the streets, from this creek in the end of your streets, from the main river back to your house. So you have to make all this cycle, the hydrological cycle, visible for the city dwellers, because they became alienated from this system, and they have to become aware again of this.
Comments? I think this is, please, 2 questions. The first and I think the birthday person should be the first. Yeah? No, okay, don't. I'm joking. No,
Okay, I'd like to congratulate you all for their very wonderful lectures. And I have a specific question for Professor Carlos Mirzva. You talked one very important thing that called my attention about reuse. When you talk about reuse, we have guidelines from EPA to see, follow this. If you are going to reuse this system, that system, you have to attend another parameters. And you showed very well that the most expensive part of this reuse system is the distribution system. So you said, maybe you can treat for potable purposes. Just if you have, do you know how it's going in Brazil, especially in Brazil, because you have a resolution that is forbidden to reuse for potable purpose, resolution 54 from 2005, that forbidden. And if you have, will you overcome this resolution, if it will be possible to reuse it considering drinking purposes? Thank you.
That's a good question. Well, let's just explain one thing. We already are doing potable reuse, but the people doesn't mind, I think, because if you just dump the sewage in the river, and the river flows to the other cities, the city just pump the water, treat by a conventional system, the treatment system, and then distribute to people. It's a kind of non-planned water reuse. The idea of the cost, as I said, the restriction that you have on the legislation is it could be overcome, because the resolution 54 is just established some criteria for non-potable reuse. If you think that you are going to deal with potable water, you need to follow other legislation, like the laws from the Ministry of Health in Brazil. And also, you can discuss. You can have an open discussion with the people, because most of the people, they don't like to hear about potable reuse. However, they are already doing that. So the only thing that we are trying to do is to make it official and more safe than it was now. It is now. I don't know if it answered.
Thank you. The birthday.
Okay, thank you very much, and congratulations for the talk. Perhaps it's a conceptual difference between your area and my area. My area is more in the coastal zone, but for me, a nature-based solution is when you are able to recover the ecosystem resilience and the connectivity, and that is very, very complicated when we are in cities. For me, a broader concept is the green infrastructure, that in one level is ecosystem-based solution, and in the last level is the engineering, when you have to remove the infrastructure. That in the middle there are at least 3 or 4 layers that is possible, at least for concept. But my question is more focusing in other part that I was missing in the equation. When you are talking about water management strategies, how feasible are there if we don't consider, for example, that the population in cities are growing very fast, mainly in developing countries. When I start to see, for example, the statistics in Mexico, Brazil, South Africa, among others, it's scary to see that the space is the same, the resources are the same, and when I start to see in solution, for me, they are less gray and very difficult to go to the ecosystem-based solutions.
For more information, São Paulo is not growing so fast than before. I think São Paulo, no, Brazil is growing less than 1% a year. So now we are starting to establish the population in the city. I don't know in Africa and other parts, but I think I don't know, in Brazil we have this situation. So I think it's, from my point of view, I think one important thing is to dealing with the availability of water from different sources. Probably yesterday Monica Porto said the integration of, for example, a metropolitan region of São Paulo. We need to bring water far from São Paulo to supply. But I think it will be interesting to dealing with, I don't know if you know about a soft path, is a kind of thinking restriction of availability of water and manage of during this situation. For example, São Paulo has 21 million people, and we have already some kind of 60 cubic meter per second availability. We need to dealing with this availability, manage this amount of water with this population. Maybe find 50 liters per day per person will be could be done, because we need to deal with the limits about this and manage in different ways to include it, reuse not natural base, but green infrastructure to rebuild this resilience in the cities. I think will be integration management, dealing with the reduce the use of water from the population. So, for example, São Paulo has normally 120 liters per day per person, so it's a little bit high, but we should decrease these and reuse or manage the better way this water. I don't know if I give some, please included some comments, please.
Let me just help you on your question. Basically, it's not the people that are growing, but the cities are growing, because people are moving from the rural areas to the city areas. That's a big problem here. In the South America, the provision of the WHO is that almost 90% of the people will live in the cities. So the problem basically is how to manage these people that are coming, because if you don't have the planning to expand the city areas, you have the same problem. So you have a lot of informal settlements where there's no sewage treatment system, there's no water distribution system. People start to use the water, and then the infrastructure goes behind. So that's the biggest problem, I think, in developing countries. Brazil is like that. São Paulo, the metropolitan region of São Paulo, is facing this problem. Even though the population is not growing too much, the people moving from outside of the cities is quite high. So we need to manage this problem. So that is, I think, is the main issue that should be dealing with.
And so also to complete what you said, Carlos, the people are moving from the inner city to outskirts of the city. That's more a lower price of land here in Brazil. in São Paulo, and that's where the main sources of the water are. So you have this kind of green belt that used to be around city. In São Paulo, you have used to be at least the biosphere reserve of Greenbelt, São Paulo Greenbelt Biosphere Reserve. That is the mountains around São Paulo. That used to be where the watershed was for São Paulo, and that's the areas that are used to be that are now being in pressure of settlements. The informal settlements occurs exactly over the areas where used to be the springs for the city. So that's mostly the area, because in downtown you have mostly open areas. There is a lot of vacant buildings that became squatters in the downtown area. So you can move all these people that are moving outside the outer rings of the city. You can put all these people together back in the city. There's room for all people there, mostly. And you have all these people being expelled from the inner rings of the city for outsides, when they are in those sensitive areas for water production, because this is the most, they are using these people for deforestation of these outer rings areas, for occupation for this area, using them as excuse for using for occupying areas forested. So you cannot blame them because they are searching for areas for building their homes, but they are using these people for occupying areas that ought to be occupied by forests to produce water. So this is the main problem for water-producing regions around São Paulo. So you are destroying these watersheds nearby São Paulo, and we are being obliged to be searching for another watersheds in faraway zones, and we are fighting for other cities, other states, to bring water from other states, that cities that also need water from those watersheds, to bring water from São Paulo. So we start a kind of a water war with other cities, because we are destroying all the watersheds in nearby São Paulo. And also there are studies that it's much cheap to restore the forests around São Paulo than bring water from the watersheds. But perhaps it's more interesting for some economic interests to build these huge engineering works, to build these channels and all these pipes to bring water from Amazon perhaps, than to bring water, than to restore the forests around São Paulo. So it's another kind of works to be done. Because restoring the forests around São Paulo, you'll be a small percentage of this amount of money. And that is a good example of a green infrastructure to rebuild, to reforest the forests around São Paulo.
So I just wanted to add to that the intention of green infrastructure is not to replace hard infrastructure at all.
No, it's complementary.
It's meant to be complementary. We will never get away from hard concrete, from the normal infrastructure in order to provide resources. But I think what this is showing very strongly is the importance of that spatial planning aspect, the importance of being able to see how to look at your watershed, how to look at your catchment, and let's face it, we're going to have to think about cities as catchments much more strongly. And how do you protect those fringes with the green infrastructure and protect the ecosystem services that they can provide? So I'm sure you've looked at the UN report on nature-based solutions. Very clear in there that this is a complementary process. And I think that's also echoed in the work that Peter Blake does he used to be with the Pacific Rim Institute. Controversial, but he's had a very recent report on the soft path, hard path dependency. The water crisis is here worldwide, I think. No. We can't escape that. No. And now we've got to try and approach it through these different ways of doing things.
That's why you talked about redundancy. You know?
Yeah.
You have the need, as Mirza told, you have to have a lot of solutions together. It's a toolbox you have to work with. A lot of solutions at the same point, but you don't have only one solutions, but a lot of them work together.
Excuse me. My name is José Araruna, and I'm from Rio de Janeiro. And I would like to address a question to Professor Pellegrino. I don't have the numbers from São Paulo, but in my city, we have a lot of forests within the city. And we only produce 3 cubic meters per second from those sources. And in Rio, we consume 49 cubic meters per second. So only forest is not so possible to supply a very big city like megalopolis, like Rio and also São Paulo. But the question that I want to place to you is about water balance. When you say that your green infrastructure, you put a lot of beautiful plans. But are you considering the geological media, for instance? Are you considering the amount of evaporation? For instance, in my state, Ceará, we lose 1 meter of water column per year only for evaporation. We also have to think about the runoff and the amount of water that also infiltrate. So when we design some kinds of solution, we have to think not only on the beautiful of that, but also how could we maintain that? I believe in Rio we have only a positive water balance for 2 or 3 months. In São Paulo must be very even like that. So what is going to happen in the other 9 months of the year? Are you going to input more water to maintain all the vegetation?
No. These specific images that I show were not for water.
Water plants?
No, it's not for water supply. They are exactly the opposite. They were for water detention. They are piscinões. So they are supposed to be empty or mostly empty most of the time. They will be mostly kind of wetlands. They'll be empty most of the time. They are not supposed to be water for use, for people use. They are not be supplying water for people use.
No, I'm not thinking about water use. What I'm thinking that you need to input some water to maintain the vegetation.
No, but the vegetation are supposed to be like the same vegetation that used to be in a wetland.
Yeah, but you need to think about the water cycle. Is it raining enough to maintain that vegetation?
There was the water table that used to be there, no?
Do you know where the water table is positioned here in São Paulo?
Yes, they are
it's
there.
19 meters below the ground surface.
Yes, of course. But
there is no vegetation that can collect that water from the water table.
But there are water that will be reserved there for some time. There are dams to be stocking that water sometimes.
Yeah,
and we need water to be stocked there.
You are very lucky because you are in a sedimentary basin here.
Yeah.
And you have very fine materials that can have a large water storage. But this is just for 3 or 4 months of the year.
But
you
no
have
problem.
to think
That
about
can be empty and problem. They'll be empty, of course, and can be empty all the time. Sometimes, no problem. There'll be only grasses up there, no problem. And as you go any creek in the streets, there will be only a flow base of the water going through that in the middle of the grasses. Almost no way to be there. It's a normal situation in the city. No problem. Okay. We were showing that anyway, as you show during an event, or just after an event of the
But
storm.
You're going to see that you need to water the vegetation, and you're going to spend more water doing this kind of solution.
Of course, there will be no submerged water there. It's pretty clear. There will be no sand water there. But anyway, what we are trying to make that is just a view when you have all these watersheds with some kind of periodization from these all tributaries. So we hope that it's some of the modeling that we're trying to work there is that some of these tributaries will be having more water achieving there also. So we're trying to make some work. It's not, of course, it's just a tentative research. We're trying to make this perhaps with more water achieving, gathering there in the end. But the idea is that it can work with several different levels of water. That's a very initial work in there. We can hope to be able to work there more in the future.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. But you love to have more evapotranspiration because the idea is that you get more humidity in the water, in the urban environment also.
Another question? Oh. No? No, another? No? So I think it will be very interesting. Yeah? Marcelo? No? Okay. If you want to talk, no? It's okay. So we have a very nice discussion here about this, and I think it's just make a resume from this. I think it will be different aspects to try to find solutions for city water management in cities. So there is not only technological, not only natural based solution, but integrated solutions for water management. I think, as mentioned here, we are now facing cities, big cities, small cities, facing climate change. So we need to be prepared for the situation that's not possible to provide prevent. So we need these solutions to start to build and to integrate these solutions, linking water security and sustainable goals, because I think we need more different aspects to dealing with this crisis, water crisis that we are facing. Thank you very much for attention. Thank you for the colleagues and members of this table. I think you was very interesting morning discussing this. Thank you very much.
Thank you.